Hi, hello, welcome to the session. Ventricles of the brain are cavities inside the central nervous system filled with cerebrospinal fluid. Third ventricle is almost like a vertical slit. It is sandwiched between the encephalon of either sides. In the lower part of the diencephalon, that is below the thalamus, lies hypothalamus. In Kannada, there is a proverb, Murti chikkadadaru, Kirti doddadu, means small the structure, but not the pain. This is classically followed by hypothalamus, having extensive functions, though so tiny. Here, I am discussing on third ventricle and hypothalamus. Objectives of the session that the things you will be able to perform after the session are you can be able to explain formation of third ventricle, outline the boundaries and relations of third ventricle. You can mention the communications and recesses of third ventricle. Yes, there are some pocket-like extensions within the third ventricle. They are known as recesses. You will be able to enlist the subdivisions of hypothalamus. Though so tiny, it has been divided into many subdivisions. You will be able to recall the connections of hypothalamus, brief the hypothalamo-hypophyseal portal system, functions of hypothalamus, and few related applied anatomical aspects. This picture shows developmentally the swellings of brain, forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. Extensively, the cavity transforms in the forebrain into two lateral ventricles and one third ventricle. Lateral ventricles are extensively developing on either sides of the diencephalon. So these are cavities in the telencephalon, lateral ventricles, and this is cavity in the diencephalon, which is third ventricle. At the level of midbrain, it is aqueductus sylvius, and fourth ventricle is formed within rhombencephalon. Third ventricle is cranially communicating to two lateral ventricles and caudally to aqueductus sylvius. Yes, it lies within diencephalon. You can observe the watermarks of ventricles here. This is lateral ventricle, different parts, anterior horn, posterior horn, and inferior horn. This is slit-like third ventricle, and communications are seen here. Cranially to lateral ventricles both sides and caudally to aqueductus sylvius and fourth ventricle. Third ventricle is exactly within diencephalon. This is coronal section of the same. Here, vertical slit-like third ventricle is seen. Either sides, these are the mass of nuclei within diencephalon. Here, this is thalamus, and below the thalamus, a tiny hypothalamus. Communication to both lateral ventricles on either sides are seen here. The white arrow is showing the communication. We are also observing telechoroidea, that is the mass of tissue, capillary tissue, which forms the CSF, which is protruding onto the roof of third ventricle. This is diagrammatic representation of mid-sagittal section through the encephalon, showing slit-like third ventricle. You can make out here the outlines of the third ventricle, which are so irregular. It has roof, floor, anterior and posterior relations. In the roof, it is related to column of fornix, which is outpouring tract from hippocampus. Anteriorly, it is limited by lamina terminalis and anterior commissure. Inferiorly, it is limited or related to optic chiasma, infundibular stalk or pituitary stalk, mammillary body, and posterior perforated substance. Posteriorly, it is limited by pineal gland and its stalk with habelunar commissures and posterior commissure within its stalk. Both thalami get interconnected by interthalamic adhesion. The interthalamic adhesion has to pass through third ventricle. It is here. Here you can observe telechoroidea is extension of pia mater which is covering on the outer surface of the brain towards the ventricles of the brain. So while extending, it will take capillary plexus inside it. Once it projects into the ventricular cavity, it is covered by ependymal cells as well. Ependyma covered pia mater having capillary tuft is called as choroid plexus, which is responsible for CSF formation. Here we are discussing on communications and recesses of third ventricle. Rostrally, much anteriorly, it is related or it is communicating with lateral ventricles. The foramen for communication with lateral ventricle is interventricular foramen or foramen of Monro. Posteriorly, caudally, it is communicating with aqueduct of Sylvius. A faint ridge extends on either sides between these two foramen, which it is called hypothalamic sulcus. Indeed, it separates hypothalamus from thalamus. There are some pocket-like extensions. They are numbered here 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. They are known as recesses of third ventricle. To mention them, one is infundibular recess, optic recess, anterior recess, suprapineal recess, and pineal recess. Before enlisting the subdivisions of hypothalamus, let us discuss what is the composition of hypothalamus. Hypothalamus has several groups of nuclei. What is nuclei? It is collection of neuronal cell bodies. Then how these nuclei are distinct? How they are separately located? Because there are group of nerve fibers or processes of neurons which are running between these group of nuclei. Like that, nuclei can be separate entities within the hypothalamus. All these nuclei are separated by nerve fibers, processes of neurons. Like this, hypothalamus can be divided into subdivisions. Don't worry with names of the nuclei, just observe how they are shown here with different colors. These are all the different nuclei present within one-sided hypothalamus. So how these can be divided? This is hippocampal formation and this is projection fibers, fornix, body of the fornix, and it is going down to the mammillary bodies. Mammillary bodies are parts of hypothalamus. So these two anterior columns of fornix are running within the mass of hypothalamus on either sides of the third ventricle in the anterolateral aspects in the inferior part. So these fibers which are running within the hypothalamus can divide these group of nuclei into medial group and lateral group. So let us say this is vertical slit, this is anterior part and this is posterior part, and these are all the nuclei of one side and these are all of other side. If fornix is running here, column of the fornix is running here, it is dividing whole of the hypothalamus into medial group of nuclei and lateral group of nuclei. Don't worry for the individual name of the nuclei. It can be subdivided into medial group and lateral group. This subdivision is with respect to anterior column of the fornix. Let us discuss on another variety of subdivision. Let's get oriented here. This is anterior side, this is posterior side, optic chiasma, infundibulum, aqueduct of Sylvius, foramen of Monro. Yes, from anterior to posterior side, if we have to divide the hypothalamus into different columns by vertical lines, imaginary lines, we can divide it. The different colors have been shown here. Preoptic region, supraoptic region above the optic chiasma, tuberal region above the infundibulum or tuber cinereum, and mammillary region. Like this, from anterior to posterior, vertical column like arrangement of nuclei can be named. This is other variety of subdivision. Let me collectively mention important nuclei and their functions here. To discuss the functions of hypothalamus, integrator of autonomic nervous system, it controls emotions and sexual activity. It's a thermoregulator. It links nervous and endocrine system, releases water-saving hormone, antidiuretic hormone, and oxytocin. It drives thirst and hunger. It involves or controls circadian rhythm, and it is regulating sleep and wakeful state. To mention few important connections of hypothalamus, chiefly efferents are going to neuroendocrine influence on hypophysis cerebri, and also to visceral centers of brainstem and spinal cord for regulation. Both afferents and efferents are coming from and going to limbic system, neocortex, and thalamus. Only afferents are reaching from olfactory impulses, visual impulses, and also from ascending somatosensory pathway bypassing thalamus. Some of them reach hypothalamus. Let me discuss on hypothalamo-hypophyseal portal system. Here, in the infundibulum, arcuate nucleus produces release hormones which have to reach the adenohypophysis. There is no anatomical connection developmentally between adenohypophysis and neurohypophysis because adenohypophysis is developmentally from roof of pharynx, Rothke's pouch. Anatomical connection gets established once vascularity develops, that is, capillary plexus from this infundibulum are connected to capillary plexus of adenohypophysis by hypothalamo-hypophyseal portal system. This system brings all the release hormones to act on adenohypophysis. However, neurohypophysis is in direct communication with hypothalamus. Supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei, which secrete vasopressin and oxytocin, are directly reaching neurohypophysis by axoplasmic flow, which gets stored in the axonal terminal buttons and get released into capillaries of neurohypophysis. Tumors of the brain in the lower part of diencephalon can involve hypothalamus. To mention few, adenomas, meningiomas, or hypothalamic gliomas. Hypothalamic lesions can impair the regulation of hypothalamus. It can cause sensitivity to heat, mood swings, anxiety, irritability, insomnia and tiredness, constant thirst or lack of libido or lack of sexual activity. This ends the class on third ventricle and hypothalamus. Have a great day.